Dung, 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 dung.
Hi, everyone. Hi there. Thank you for joining. I'm just going to give it a minute for everybody to get connected. Oh, wow. Lots of attendees today. It's great. I'm seeing names from colleagues and clients from across the globe. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Everybody, just so you know, this webinar is being recorded and it is being live streamed on YouTube as well. I'm pleased to confirm, for those who don't know much about South Africa, I didn't ride an elephant to work today. I came in a Renault, and the lions didn't chew the fiber cables yet. So our Wi-Fi is working here for the moment. Let's get it started properly. I'm Taryn. I'm the marketing manager here at Encona, and we provide training, consulting, and production services. You can find out more about us on encona.org. I'm personally excited for today's topic because I have worked with so many personality types in so many stressful situations over the years. And I'm also acutely aware of how my responses have developed over time. We've got our subject matter experts on the line today discussing emotional intelligence versus systems. First up, we've got everyone's favorite chairman of the board and founder of Encona, Hans Trunkenpolz. And then we have industrial and organizational psychologist Kirsten Liss. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you for the invite, Taryn.
Great. Just checking, can everybody hear us properly? Are there any issues? Thanks. Yolanda, you mentioned it. Okay, perfect. Yes, I saw the comment saying, Taryn, you're on mute. I'm in the same room as Kirsten, and we're speaking through a common speaker. Thank you. So I'm going to be hopping off camera shortly. I'm normally a background kind of scenes person. I'll be joining you again for the Q&A section. Please feel free, as you're already doing, use the chat function. Let us know where you are, where you come from, and go ahead and chat with one another. If I can just ask, as you've got questions, please could you try and use the function at the bottom actually saying Q&A. It's a different box, just to ensure we don't miss any of the questions you might have. Other than that, over to you, Hans and Kirsten. So let me know, what do you think? Or tell us, are management and production systems efficient without EQ?
Are you in the poll now?
Yeah, just got passed.
Okay, should we give a minute or continue?
You can go for it. We've just launched a poll. You might see a notification on your screen.
Okay, fantastic. Taryn, thank you very much. Good day, good evening, good morning to everybody out there from wherever you're dialing in for this webinar. I think we selected a very, very interesting topic for you, and at least we can see that from the number of people dialing into this. As Taryn already mentioned before, Encona is a globally operating training and consulting firm. So we have a lot of contacts with clients in all kinds of sizes, from small companies to the corporate world, if I may call it that. And we've always been experts in systems, operational excellence, products and processes. But the reason why we selected this since a number of years, actually quite a long time, we realize more and more that everybody's trying to optimize product designs and product development, and the same for the processes. But nobody really ever took care of human capital, which is truly all the employees are an asset to the organizations. And that being said, and us as consultants going out there and in trainings, we experience all the frustrations out there and sorrows and pains and whatever emotional states these people are in. And we said from this moment many years ago, I said we have to integrate human capital, the well-being of people in an organization, and have to combine that and bring people together and connect and link and take the human capital side just as seriously as process improvements. This is what we do every day out there. And of course, for us being engineers, we were then looking for the right people that can drive the journey with us. And this is where I'm really personally very thrilled that we found Kirsten Liss to be part and become part of our projects and work closely with us. And from that perspective, Kirsten, it's a great pleasure to have you on board, and thanks for joining in here as well.
Thanks, Hans, and thanks to Encona. I'm just so excited to be here. And well, I actually can't believe how far we have come. It's been over 2 years now. And just to reverse a bit from that, in the beginning, I used to come from a recruitment background before I went into the wellbeing and the OD space. And I was fascinated with, no matter what job you were in, no matter what hierarchical status you were in, what salary you were earning, there was just constant complaining. And I really just wanted to understand and get to the core of what these issues were. And I started developing such an interest in emotional intelligence because most of the time we tend to lack self-awareness. And so I developed a product in emotional intelligence that I wanted to bring alive. And having worked in the automotive industry and coming across Encona, Hans, that's when I reached out to you actually on LinkedIn. And it was just such an awesome experience because I wanted to learn, how do I bring my material to life? How do I put it online and let people use this from all over the world? And I still said to you, my product is very different to yours. It's very much human behavioral driven, but I just need advice to get some ideas. And then you still responded to me and said, well, of course we give you advice, but I see a bigger picture already. And there's a reason as to why we were brought together. And you said, it will be a good meeting, trust me. And I did. And 2.5 years later, here we are doing something that we're both passionate about. So thank you.
Yeah, only a pleasure. So Kirsten, now for the audience out there, maybe let's start with giving that acronym a name here. We're talking about emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. Can you just elaborate on that and tell our friends and listeners out there in the world as to what exactly is EQ all about, or emotional intelligence all about, and what does it stand for? Sure.
So I know on the webinar chat, we had someone ask, well, what is the difference between EQ and IQ? So just to be clear, IQ is a measure of a person's reasoning ability. And in short, it's supposed to gauge how well someone can use information and logic to answer questions or make predictions. But when it comes to emotional intelligence, it's about how do we reason using our emotions. So it involves two critical abilities. The first is the ability to recognize, understand, and control our emotions. And I'm just going to say the word control. And it's the ability to recognize, understand, and influence others' emotions. And the one thing that I find lacks in emotional intelligence in terms of the definition with the control element is we also need to recognize and understand what is not in our control and what is. So we can often become emotionally charged when things are not in our control, and we know that much isn't in our control. So typically, an employee will come and see me because they're suffering from such anxiety because they feel that whenever they approach their manager or their superior, they would say the hand goes up and they yell, "Not now." Whereas the employee that's not seeing me is the one who's having a manager who is responding in a much more emotionally intelligent way, in that they are able to recognize and understand and use emotions effectively. So I know, Hans, that is something that we have reflected on.
Yeah. Look, in practical terms, from what we see, and I believe the audience out there is gonna copy that, is a variety of different situations. Maybe a manager that acts disrespectful to an employee, maybe a project manager that is beating the drum towards his team members, maybe a customer that's coming for an audit that is also beating the drum or acting disrespectful. And there is countless of different interactions between human beings in an organization. And an organization is such a complex organism. But maybe, Kirsten, you can tell us a little bit actually what's really happening as to why people act and behave in this way and that way, and why do they find it so difficult to get the link together and work together as a team? That's effectively what we all want to do, and which is the aim of the organization. But what happens with humans as to why they react in this way and that way?
So probably the best way to explain this is by using something called the transactional analysis. So some of you may have come across this before, but it's a model developed by Dr. Eric Berne in the 50s. And it's such a great, simple illustration of how we typically behave. And the main idea of TA is that we communicate using 3 distinct ego states, and that is namely the parent, the child, and the adult. Now, our ego state will respond depending on the ego state of the recipient, and this can be done consciously as well as subconsciously. But what matters most is whether you are able to identify with your reasoning and communication, and whether your ego takes over and becomes a role that you actually play. So just to give a bit of context to this, that the parent typically stems from our past, containing our beliefs, our attitudes, our feelings, our behaviors that we observe from a young age. So who we are today is very much like a blueprint of our parental upbringing. For example, we grew up experiencing love, care, and support from a real positive perspective, and that's the nurturing parent. However, we also had negative experiences such as blaming, punishment, belittling, shaming that comes from our parents as well. And I say parents because some of us did not be brought up by parents. So the child is very much like the parent stemming from our past. And as a child, we experience thoughts and feelings and behaviors in the observations and interactions of our parents. So we've got the natural, the free child, where we learn to be curious and creative, open and loving in our behavior. And the adaptive child is developed through the interpretation of the observations and experiences, such as feelings of anxiousness or guilt, fear, shame, even people pleasing. So people that are, really accommodating, or attention seeking in response to the world around us. And
So basically what you're saying, Kirsten, is that every human being has, in basic principle, all these 3 main ego types.
Yeah.
And if I understand you correctly as well, and that's what makes it so tricky in dealing with people, is that people, depending on activities or events, they change also that ego state during a single discussion even. Look down here, this rebellious child. I mean, I think probably everybody can relate to that. I've seen many people out in the industry that are throwing toys out of the cot. So this will be the rebellious child. So we all have that in us, and we're permanently changing the ego if triggered by any events. And that can be a single word. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. And it's totally dependent on a variety of factors. And it's quite unique to us all, actually. So, and that is the key thing. Often we don't actually realize what is going on. So it's where what is key is to try and be the adult in this whole transactional analysis perspective. And that means to be free from the influence of those ego states, be it the parent or the child. And that's really challenging, as many of us are bound by that emotional memory, limiting ourselves through all sorts of things where we have these fears and guilts and hostility. And that's a difficult one to free ourselves from, because if we are able to do that, we're able to think and act based on what is happening in the here and now, but subconsciously it's been ingrained in us. And the closer the relationship is with someone, the more the emotional triggers are experienced. So in the workplace, what you typically find is you don't normally find these sort of behaviors when you first start your job, because you've got to be on your best behavior. But over time, we need to start realizing the appropriateness of our ego states with our team members and even our clients. And we can do this by actually breaking the bad habits, because those habits really present a power that prevents you from focusing on moving past that. So in the workplace, you see examples of transactional analyses at all levels. So you'll get the rebellious employee. They may try to always defend their behavior by blaming, say, I can't get it done because it wasn't given to me on time. And so typically the leader will respond in a critical parental manner, such as, well, you should have known better, and ensure that it was done by now regardless. And then sometimes you get the leader could act like the adaptive child when they're under pressure saying, I can't take this anymore. And then you actually get the employee taking on a nurturing parental role, saying something like, it's okay, I'll take care of it. So instances like that really highlight that EQ in interpersonal relationships is quite limited. And when you think of conflicts, our brains automatically go into our survival mode, and we put up our defense mechanisms to protect ourselves. And we become creatures of habit in the way we typically respond subconsciously. So I know, Hans, through our discussions, you typically experience this parental child role in the organization, and it brings many problems when using those defense mechanisms with those.
Yes, that's right. And this is why we're talking about this. And this is, folks, where emotional intelligence that everybody can learn, by the way. Okay. Helps a consultant a lot. Of course, we get engaged in very confrontational situations, stuff like that. So also, as you said earlier, understanding the ego state that a person is in, and then try to manage and understand and recognize, so that you, from a professional level, cannot act on the same level, otherwise it's going nowhere. And so a consultant definitely has a lot of practice fields for the application thereof. But I would like to relate this to a practical. I've also prepared a couple of slides, Kirsten, for you to get this whole situation running in an organization. I'm just trying to flip this further here. And I just recently had a presentation in front of a very big company, top managers, and we were speaking about processes and departments. And I said to them that, have you ever thought about what is the meaning of a department versus a process? And I said, but whether you have or not, we've done this for you, and we Googled. And this is quite an interesting result. And I think it's important to get this simply because we are putting ourselves in an environment that makes it difficult to apply emotional intelligence. And this was the result. It's a major territorial administrative subdivision. So not only that we run our departments out there in many cases as a territory, we also subdivide ourselves from the complexity of the process network in an organization. And then I challenged them and I said, folks, have you ever thought about territory? What is the meaning of territory? And I try to explain, simply because it comes from the animal kingdom world. And interesting enough, here we go. It's not looking further. The territory, also very, very interesting. Look at this. This is what I told them. That's an area that an animal defends against intruders, especially of the same species. And I try to explain them as a guys, do yourself a favor and replace that word animal by human beings. And then you see exactly where we are today in organizations, in many, many cases. So we live in this territory of a department where we are subdivided and isolated in the organization that can only breathe in a network of processes. And then we start defending that territory from intruders. And that's actually quite interesting, because now we start acting like lions. And you know how it is in a lion pride? There can only be one, all right? So this lion male here is running the pride, and it's all his, and the ladies are his, and he's making babies, and they also little male calves, and they grow up, and every one of you out there that has children understands exactly. They become juveniles and grow, and then they start to become very clever and start challenging the parents in whatever way. In a lion pride, it comes to a fight, but there's only one, like in an organization. There are the kings and the queens in all the departments, and they will defend their territories, whatever cost. And this is a situation that we have out there. Are we acting like humans by applying the basic principles of emotional intelligence, or are we just acting like lions and defending our departments and the practical? There is countless of practical examples. I just heard not a long time ago a production manager said, well, my dashboard would be, my KPIs would be green, but HR, they didn't provide the indirect workers that I requested. So if HR would do their job, my dashboard would be very green. And he says, and my dashboard would be also green, but maintenance, they cannot provide technical uptime of my equipment. So if they would do the job right, I would be. And there is countless, and probably everybody that is listening today can relate to that and would have for his own countless number of practical examples of that. And this is a critical situation we are in, because in reality, a process, and as I said earlier, such a complex organism like a company is living and needs to manage a complexity of processes, and processes need to link individuals that come from different departments. And from that perspective, but Kirsten, before we come to that, maybe you can elaborate on that, from that territorial thinking, from that defense mode. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more for our audience to reinforce that understanding as to what's happening in humans in this defense mode.
Yeah, thanks, Hanson. I absolutely love your definition there of the territorial side. I think it's just so well put. And if we think of humans, when we are threatened, the first thing we want to do is put up our defense mechanisms when we perceive threat. And the defense mechanism is used as a way of displacing our emotions. And this often happens when we are trying to control our true self to avoid derailing. So the extent of this and the various defense mechanisms that we may use largely depends on the unconscious and what we are born with, and on our personality traits that's typically been shaped over time. So gaining insight into your personality is really important in self-awareness when it comes to emotional intelligence. So the function of the defense mechanism is to protect the individual from anxiety and emotional distress. That is why if we get an email and it's a negative email, we immediately respond to that and defend ourselves. And these feelings are derived from our thought, and they are influenced within a context. So just to give an overview of the construct of personality helps us understand very much at a deeper level how our thoughts and our feelings and our behavior applies to conscious thinking and the impact of this changing our behavior. So there's various models for understanding personality, and I think most of us would know a little bit about Freud, but he defines our personality as our id, our ego, and our superego. And our id is our instinctive desire or reaction. That's that one where as soon as we get that email, we want to respond. That seeks instant gratification for our wants and needs. And often if these needs or wants are not met, a person can become angry or tense or anxious or irritable. And Carl Jung, he says our id is our shadow, and that's our dark side of our personality. So our instincts serve very much as a motivational source, is to protect. And often if it gets so suppressed, we can become dull or lifeless and even non-creative. It actually serves a really important purpose, but it can impact us negatively in our careers, our relationships, and how we feel about ourselves even. Now, the superego is based on morals and judgment. So what is right, what is wrong? And a person who has a strong superego is prone to self-judgment, and they've got very high standards and a feeling of inferiority and is quite self-critical. So, and it becomes really unhealthy when we strive for things like perfection or alienate others because we think we are superior, or we become unapproachable due to our overconfidence or ignorance, and we give little regard for others. And you often see this in a leadership role because we feel powerful. So it's quite an interesting dynamic, and I often talk about this in emotional intelligence when it comes to the concept of power. But the id and the superego is not what we usually share with others, but it's often felt by others. So we've got our ego, and that is the ability to rationalize between the two when it comes to decision making, when it comes to having good relationships, when it comes to our thoughts and our feelings that impact in the way that we actually act. And lack of self-awareness causes the id and the superego to be in a state of continuous conflict with the environment because they try to overcompensate for these feelings using the defense mechanisms. So I think the key here is to try and create a balance between the two. And it's tricky. It really is tricky. So developing our EQ has to be based on having insight into the relationship of who and what we are and why we are this way and how we manage our behaviors. Hans, I know you can share some of the typical problems that you've encountered and how it plays out in the workplace when it comes to this kind of concept.
I would like to throw you another spanner here. So now that we talk about these isolation or territories in departments and that protective mode, there's another quite interesting problem situation that we have. First of all, just to bring this to an end, so when we have these silos now of the departments and protection and territories and stuff like that, I'm just giving you a number here on the slide with an area of different departments, but in actual reality, and this is where emotional intelligence definitely help you when it's properly implemented and applied, I should say. This is how a process runs. And an organization is nothing else but an interaction of different processes that are owned by different individuals. And from that perspective, a process needs the engagement and interaction with several different individuals from different departments. But we spoke about that, but I want to make it a little bit more challenging for you, and that is what we like to call a standpoint of view. And let's say we have an organization is implementing a new product, okay, and tries to bring it from the first contact to customer into a serial life in a serial production, for argument's sake, and we're running a project. Why am I choosing a project? Because the ones of you, probably the most of you that are engaged in manufacturing fields like that, but also service processes, we need to bring different people together from different departments. Okay, so we need the quality guys, we need the purchasing guys, we need the engineers, we need the logistics. So everybody's coming to the party. And here's the thing, and this is what we need to understand. let's say this is the quality representative in a team or in a project. And this is his personal standpoint of view. So basically, following those lines, it's illustrated and as to what he can see from the whole context of a project. From his standpoint of view, that is related to his job post, that is related to his specific tasks he has to fulfill. So when he looks at the project, there's only a certain area that he sees. So from his standpoint of view, he's always making the right decisions from what he sees. If it's always the right decision in the whole context, we don't know. Unlikely. And here comes the engineer. The engineer with a different job set and different tasks. This is how he looks at the project, and this is what he sees. So you have a certain area of parts of the whole that you see together. This is where you most of the time have a consensus. But then he sees certain areas of the projects where the quality is not necessarily involved into its every detail. And here comes the problem. And I think everybody can relate to that. As of a sudden, the quality guy starts thinking is that, why on earth did the engineers do that? Why? And he won't understand. But he won't understand necessarily that he doesn't understand the topic. He's just coming from a different standpoint of view and a different task list that he has to do. So he's making now the decisions that he does from his standpoint of view are also correct. Nobody's sabotaging. So from everybody's individual, and now you get, of course, a production representative, and you get a purchasing guy, and I could have drawn more departments in there. But just to get the principle across here, folks, is that everybody that works in a team is having his individual standpoint of view at looking at a problem, a project, whatever the case may be. And this is where the conflict of interest starts. Because now defending mechanism and his individual standpoint of view is a great potential for conflict. So emotional intelligence is actually, where are these people now, the quality guys, to invite the engineers over and said, listen, there's a couple of things I don't understand as to why it happened. Can you explain me? I just don't get it. And in the other case, may I invite you to my standpoint of view to help you understand as to why I did this, and discuss and communicate and talk about it instead of breaking out in all these emotional breakouts and whatnot. And this is what then humans often do. They start talking about including even third parties and said, you know, my friend, the engineers over there, they are just gaga. And vice versa. So we're starting to spread a hugely negative energy in the whole organization just by thoughts and loading different emotions. And then we upload that whole dark cloud over an organization, and everybody is eventually affected. So bringing people together, emotional intelligence and the skills thereof will be the winning recipe for you out there, but it will only be implemented effectively. And I can tell you that we have to suck up our egos, because remember, a man that apologizes to another man is not necessarily in the wrong. Maybe the situation or the relationship to this person for him is more important than his personal ego. Think about that. The more we are driven on our ego, it's my way or highway, the less success you will have. You apologize to a man and you're not in the wrong. Just experience for yourself what you do for this other person and what you do for yourself, and sense the energy. But the real application of emotional intelligence will only succeed if we now and then suck up our own egos. You don't always have to win for the sake of peace and for the sake of a successful project, by the way. But bringing it back to you, Kirsten, now we've talked two different problems we have, and probably most of them can relate to that, is those silo buildings we have in the organizations with to whatever extent defense mechanism to protect my own territory, as we spoke about it. And then we have to deal on top that job related, everybody has his personal standpoint of view, how he looks at a topic, a project, whatever the case may be. And here comes the conflict of interest. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit for our audience. Above that is, how can emotional intelligence help to tackle and overcome such relevant situations we have nowadays in the industry?
So the other night, I just want to start off with an example of my children. In South Africa, for those in other parts of the world, we've got something called rusks, which is like a hard bread, and they come in various sizes. You can't help it, whichever one you pull out the box. So I made my children some tea, and they each get a rusk with it to dip in the tea. And sometimes the one rusk can be a little bit bigger than the other. So there's always a race to grab the bigger rusk. And so when I say tea is ready, there's this run to win the war for the biggest rusk. But it so happened that on this mission, my daughter knocked over quite a bit of tea. So I asked her, why don't you try to be more careful? And you know how she responded? She said, because he pushed me. So this same behavior in children plays out in adult behavior when there is a problem. We very seldom say, it's me. We instead say, it's you. And this is the typical silo thinking from an individual perspective, from a team perspective, from a leadership perspective, right through to an organization when you're dealing with clients. So it's not us, it's them. So this is my first recommendation when it comes to problem solving and conflict management. It starts with I. When we do this, we immediately start to develop self-awareness and a different standpoint of view. It's amazing to me how unhelpful the human mind can be if it's untrained and managed. And the lines remind us that we too are animals and we instinctively react to protect ourselves. So this typical silo thinking, it results in breakdown in the individual, between teams, across departments, and as I said, even with our clients. And it happens so much that it's subconscious across departments and even between the positional power levels of leadership, management, and employees. And these unconscious patterns is an invisible barrier. So this is where you typically see the id or the superego or the child and parental role play out. Very rarely the adult. So in my experience, when I take a deeper look at the root cause of these issues, I find that more often than not, silos are the result of a conflicted leadership team, in particularly with their goals. And this influences employees to have feelings of resentment and cynicism within teams. And employees become frustrated with their department and the organization as a whole because they've identified the problem, but they can't do anything about it. So we find that conflicting goals between teams continue to spiral to such a dysfunctional point that when it comes to differing goals, it's totally misaligned. And the decisions that are made lack quality because key information is missing, and the search for this information is limited. And often we only include certain individuals that are within their respective domain. So if you go into a meeting angry and fail to see a different standpoint of view, you're not harnessing your emotions to guide information processing effectively for problem solving and creativity. You've created like this mental block. So it's normal to feel frustration and stress when goals are misaligned because it's difficult to know how to invest one's effort. But you can use this constructively, and this is key. Just the other day, I had to do executive leadership coaching. The one leader was willing, the other was not. And this willingness creates self-awareness. And the 360 assessment that they did spoke true to this. The leader that was willing, but not perfect, had far more positive feedback, whereas the leader who continues to remain in the defense mode had extremely negative feedback. And it's very difficult to work against the grain, but it starts somewhere, and it starts with I. So leaders have to be self-aware. They have to learn to collaborate, to be creative and confident without arrogance. And that all forms part of our self-perception, our self-expression, our interrelationships and problem solving. So in one company, we had an issue between the sales team and the compliance team, very different goals. The sales team were focused on achieving their monthly targets, while the compliance team had to ensure the sales team were compliant in the process and with the various credit vetting and so forth. And it created all sorts of problems because sales felt compliance were too administrative, which impacted the sales process negatively. And it became even more problematic when the compliance team pulled the sales because the client wasn't responding to the client application form. So it really became a hate game between the two. And I was called in an attempt to resolve this issue. And after hearing both sides of the story, I thought it was best that we used EQ for problem-solving workshops that involved the sales and the support team, as well as the compliance team, to learn about, when you spoke about, Hans, those different standpoints of view, we call them perspectives, and using their emotions to solve the problems experienced in an effective manner. So the workshop was guided by EQ strategies, and we slowly carved out the relationship issues and understood different standpoints of view and the emotions, and managed to bring a variety of solutions that could be put in practice. The compliance team managed to simplify the administration process that was deemed tedious, while the sales team realized the importance of compliance and the impact it had on the business as being far superseding the consequences of them actually not achieving a sale, because ultimately the sale wouldn't have been achieved anyway. And what we did was they decided to appoint a committee to be the mediator between the two, to monitor the situation and learn to recognize and address the problems that may arise as a continuous learning process. Remember, EQ it's not fixed. It's something we have to check in. We're like a car. We require maintenance. We need a service plan. So while there was some compromise on both sides in this particular compliance and sales team, they managed to use their emotions effectively to align their goals and to get a win-win situation. And it's not easy tasks for any organization. However, if you avoid the issue, it only creates a snowball of disaster that will lead to a crisis. So teams need to learn to slow down. They need to slow down for a few minutes to listen and care about what others are saying without putting up their defense mechanisms. And it doesn't take much to slow down. You've got to practice empathy to dismantle the silo thinking. And that is what you've got to make in your goal as well as an organization, to minimize the issues and to be able to collaborate in a manner. You have to ask questions. You've got to understand different perspectives, their positions and interest. Why isn't that dealing going to work for the team? Or why is that product not going to work? Why does your request for shared resources impact their other work so negatively? And so by understanding the real story instead of making up your own is such a key factor in reducing silos and influencing productive outcomes. If you don't ask questions, you just assume, and then we create those negative stories and you become a knower. And boy, oh boy, I have a real hard time giving credit to a knower. Sometimes I have leaders complaining that the employees are not pulling up their socks. In one instance, the leader was so intimidating that the employee was too ashamed to let them know that they were actually battling with a mental illness. So while this employee is struggling, the leader only influences them more so with anxiety and shame by reprimanding them. Because why are the leaders frustrated? They're not managing their emotions. So working on managing your own emotions with other teams overrides that habit of blaming and putting up your defense mechanisms. So I think from a systems perspective, just think about how many organizations have performance management systems in place. Some of them are great, top quality, but I can almost guarantee you that most people would say it's just a means to an end, because why? They're not used correctly. So yes, while we have great systems in place, the effectiveness is not so great. And that is why emotional intelligence is so important from a practical point of view. So Hans, I don't know if that's something, you can identify within your experience.
No, I couldn't agree more with you, Kirsten. I think the real difficult exercise is to getting control of your personal ego. In other words, if somebody is acting disrespectful or in a manner that you might dislike, that creates now a negative emotion on your side. And if you then start to respond on that same level, nobody needs to go to university to understand this is going to lead nowhere. And this is the difficult thing. And this is what I always say. Do you want to work? Do you want to work in a pleasant work environment, or do you want to be right? If you always want to be right, it's the conflict. And this is just this daily. He treats me not respectfully. Why should I give him the same? But you can't treat bad with bad. That's not going to fly. But the ones of you out there that are strong enough to overcome that ego portion to say, I don't have to be right. What's important for me is I want to have a harmonized work relationship with this person in order to not stuff up my whole life here as long as I work in this company. And you step down, and even if you apologize, and as I said, a man that doesn't apologize is not necessarily in the wrong. But maybe the relation is more important, or the success for the company is more important than his personal ego. And the ones out there that overcome that, step down and don't have to be right necessarily for the sake of, those are the ones that will flash. And I can tell you, we practice all the time. And even the practical application when you already caught in such a situation that you've been treated disrespectful. And try it out for yourself. Don't respond on the same level. It's not going to go anywhere. If you then use that opportunity to say, although it maybe was wrong the way you've been treated, and you were right because they didn't know the whole information about it, and you have the strength to come with on an adult, coming back to the transaction analysis, and not acting like a rebellious child, and you see what it does for you, and you see how you can change and have an impact on this person. It will stop. They cannot run away from this. They don't know what's happening. I blow up the fire and he's coming respectfully back to me. He's not going to last very long. It's not going to continue. But the ones out there that have the strength to do that, not necessarily being in the right, because right means defend. Right means me, my territory. And to also, and to have the strength to give way and said, I want to continue on a respectful manner, you will see what difference you make. But that is the challenge. I would admit. Kirsten, what do you say? I would admit.
Absolutely, Hans. And I think when we think of the challenge of in the workplace, is it the emotion or the thought that comes first? It's really difficult to think about how we are when it comes to an environment where we are challenged in that way. And I think that's quite interesting, is to realize that we are able to change the way we think and feel with time and practice. It is not always easy, but it is possible where, I mean, I can, for instance, say I'm quite impulsive, I must admit. Sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it's not a bad thing. But in the workplace, it would get in the way. And it wasn't until I was made aware of that did I recognize, I need to learn how to change that behavior. And even though instinctively my natural reaction is to act impulsively, I now manage that very well, even when I am challenged. So in the workplace, I think we need to be able to recognize when we are challenged emotionally or when we are challenged with thought. And I know we've had this bit of this back and forth about, is it the emotion that comes first or is it the thought? Science says it's the emotion, but you and I tend to think, well, it could be the thought first. But either way, there's always this instinctive reaction to behave a certain way. Or to think a certain way, or to feel a certain way. So on that slide that you're showing now, I think on the left-hand side is typically how we would respond not using our ego state or our adult state. We would typically respond in a way where we are triggered emotionally through thought, and it impacts our behavior. Whereas if on the right-hand side, if we tap into something called our metacognition, which is our conscious thinking, we're able to actually analyze the situation and be critical. Do I actually need to be so defensive? Do I need to react this way? Are they actually insulting me as I perceive them to be? Am I understanding the key messages? It's really about reflection and asking questions. So that is where self-awareness and emotional intelligence becomes key, because you can have all this fancy stuff in an organization, great processes and procedures in place. But if you, the individual, are driving that and the teams are driving that, and you're not able to do that effectively, it's not productive. It's not productive. So, yeah. I think, yeah.
And also maybe maybe if I very quickly before we open the Q&A session, I believe with Taryn, look at where this world is going with digitalization, with Industry 4.0. We are in a massive transformation right now out there in the workplace. And Kona is also involved in these kinds of topics with 2 other business units. And we can see already that emotions like anxiety towards digital age and replacing my jobs and whatever fear and anxiety is out there, what else other than emotional intelligence can build the bridge to that? It will be very easy for the youngsters that get born now for the first 15 years. Everything will be normal. And in an age up to 35, they will say it's very exciting what's coming. And but what about over 35, up to end of your professional life? This is the creation of pure anxiety, because they don't want to hold tablets in their hands. They're not. This is not their world anymore. Build that bridge, if not emotional intelligence. And understand that emotional intelligence is not only protecting you're protecting the whole organization. Because that one goes to another, and another applies, another applies, another applies. And as of a sudden, you will realize what kind of positive energy you're going to create. Because everything is energy, everything is energetically connected. And we like to talk about karma. You do something good to a person, good comes back to you, but also the other way around. If you don't do good to people, it comes around. What comes around, as we say. So it's an energetical connection, and emotional intelligence is, from my experience, and I can only encourage you to sink your teeth in, because in theory, it's not very difficult. Application is the challenge.
Yeah.
And for everybody that wants to apply this, we have to suck up our egos. That's the winning recipe. Elsewise, we just continue in ever-ending fights.
Yeah.
Kirsten?
Yeah, looking at it from an individual perspective, we want to be an effective leader unto ourselves, or even just a leader in an organization. there's such an increase now in the complexity in organization, and it requires organizations to design and to redesign and be more responsive to the structures to meet this expanding global need and competition that we have. And for many people will know, I love him. His name's Yuval Harari. It's an author of *Sapiens*, and he said in reference to technology, the most important thing to invest in is emotional intelligence and mental balance, because the hardest challenge will be psychological. And when we think about the way the future is evolving around technology, we have to just start using EQ more. There's just no questions about it. Even though we have smart people and smart systems, EQ supersedes the effectiveness of this. And we need to embrace the rise of systems and technology and look for ways to inject EQ into technology to stay at a competitive advantage. And that is why, having met you and the plans with my EQ course, and I'm just so excited about it. So, yeah, I've got this EQ course coming out. It's going to be launching in a few weeks. It's packed with practical activities, and it takes you on a self-journey of self-awareness through all areas of emotional intelligence. And individuals, leaders, teams, and organizations can use this to try and recognize where they are on the EQ spectrum and invest in the learning opportunities that are with this particular course. So just realizing having high EQ isn't always a good thing. So we need to have regular check-ins and monitor ourselves. We're only human. So
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Theory, again, I must say that also about leadership and all that, and I'm sure everybody out there has read all the books, left, right, and center.
Mm-hmm.
My personal favorite of leadership is, if you get a call to lead, you get a call to serve.
Yeah.
How do you serve? By dictating and telling you this and that and this and that. And the interesting thing is, you don't need to be a CEO of an organization. As an individual, in whatever corner of the organization you work, you're entitled to apply leadership. Never forget.
Yeah.
You don't have an organization entitled to do that, but apply. The theory, knowledge is power, friends. Only when it's applied.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, Taryn, I think you're on mute, but you're going to open the Q&A?
Yeah, you should be able to hear me sharing a speaker here.
Yes.
With... Cool. So there are a lot of questions. I hope I've caught them all. Thank you very much. That's interesting and insightful. And I've also had private messages and even a couple of attendees WhatsApping me saying they're really enjoying today's topic. So thank you for hosting it, guys. First off, just to give you the poll results, vastly, 88% said no. So the question was, do we think systems are efficient without EQ? And Alex made a comment very early on in the chat box that I thought kind of spoke to this and maybe summarized it. And Alex mentioned systems are efficient without EQ only if they are so well developed that the collaboration is between humans and systems, not between two humans. So I just thought that was an interesting one.
Wow.
Yeah. Hans, do you want to move it to the next slide just so that people can see the contact details for the launch of our EQ course coming out in the next few weeks?
Perfect.
Yeah.
There we go. Taryn?
So I think this answers one question. Anka, you did ask if you have recommended readings on the topic. We can certainly send that out to you, or we can explore the course. But we also don't host these webinars just to be selling these things. We do want to share information.
Absolutely.
So we can get in touch with you afterwards. And
Yeah.
I can certainly send you that information for Kirsten's course.
Yeah.
Okay, questions. Hans, directed at you from YouTube, actually, from Chris. Hi, Hans. How does the organization bridge the gap between departments with leading lions? It is obvious that we're dealing with human nature and organizational culture.
Is that for me or for Kirsten?
For you specifically, how does an organization bridge the gap between departments when there are lions leading them?
Well, Chris, it's actually really simple. And we need to understand, if you want to change that, you should be the driver of the change. If you want to change something, you need to change yourself first. And self-reflect and understand as to why you might have not been so successful in surviving in that work environment, or not so successful in managing to have a work environment of harmony and camaraderie and all that. You're the driver of that. And as I said earlier, don't go in an infight. I just had a practical example, Chris. This is simple, and it has been proven that I was in the right in what I've done. And I had a confrontation with a heavyweight manager, and he was kind of like blowing off. And I said, "Sir, please accept my apology. I made a mistake. I'm sorry," and left it there. He'd immediately calmed down because I didn't give him any munition to continue his journey. I went back, analyzed, of course, in detail, and got the whole answer that everything was correctly applied. And I knew it when I was in that interaction with this top dog. But I didn't have the motivation to have right. So in practical terms, I took the wind out of sails. All right. I don't need it to be right. I could have confronted him and gave him the whole 9 yards of evidence that the decisions were right. I could have. But then what? I would have been right, but I would have created a sour taste. So why do we have to be right all the time? And this is what I said earlier. The ones that are strong enough to suck up the ego and don't have to be right at all times for the sake of a good work environment. And then you can do different approaches to clean it out later. It's just to get out of the situation. Yeah, you understand what I'm saying? So this to me was a very winning recipe. But
may I add to that answer, Hans?
Sure.
So my question would be thrown back to Chris to say, are they really the lion? And I think you need to ask yourself that question, because we were talking about different standpoints of view. Are they really the lion? We need to consider that in general, individuals and teams may actually have good intentions, but our emotions get in the way, because when we perceive a threat, we go into the survival mode. It's not me, it's you, and we see them as the lion. But are they? And that's what we've got to challenge our thinking. It's changing, shifting how we think about things and see things, so that emotionally we can manage things better, deal with it better, integrate better, collaborate better.
And one more adding to this, Chris, please note, have you noticed how many managers and top managers are operating out there? They're absolutely not authentic. Playing a role, masquerade of protection, because one is in the meantime scientifically proven that nearly the whole humanity is suffering from birth on with a self-esteem and self-confidence issue, and that includes any manager out there. They're humans. They have the same fears like a line operator. But given the positions, they often just build up protection walls to not be exposed, that they also have the same human emotions like everybody else out there. And this is what I'm going to say you. Every person you meet in life is fighting battles you know nothing about. So be nice always.
True. I think hence the next question leads on perfectly from that, from Catalin. Do you consider it necessary for middle and top management to be tested for emotional intelligence? Or when you
Yes.
think should or could happen?
Yes.
To both of you.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, clearly.
We never stop learning.
It is absolutely insane to not use these technologies, and Kirsten could speak with you for days about this psychometrical analysis programs today. It is absolutely careless to not run these individuals through programs like that. Yes.
Yeah, we never stop learning, we never stop growing, we don't stop developing, and our context change, our situation changes. We're confronted with all sorts of things during our life stages, and so we do need to check in every now and again. If we think about the impact of what COVID has had on us and how some of us have really struggled with it, we immediately go into survival mode. So it wouldn't be, now would be such a perfect time to recheck in. And it's not about taking emotional intelligence tests or realizing actually it's quite low. It's not necessarily, it's not meant to say, oh, well, that's why you are like you are, or to pull people out and victimize them. It's really there about development and growth. If anything, it's about your journey, no one else's, but it has, your journey influences others around you. So for me, I would embrace the opportunity. I encourage it so much. But people, they're a bit reluctant to, because they're worried of how they might look. And that's the super ego taking over.
So as commented by Mihai, hopefully I pronounced that correctly. So is the answer to our troubles actually empathy and better organizational culture overall?
I wouldn't say specifically just empathy. I think it's a variety of behavioral and emotional situations and traits that need to be attended to. We need empathy, of course we do. But if you have too much empathy, there's a problem with that. Because if you have too much empathy, you're far less assertive. So that is what I spoke about, is using that, your ego to sort of balance things out. But empathy is incredibly important. So is self-regard, how you see yourself. If you've got problems with yourself, that's going to be expressed. It's the same with how you manage your stress. If you're not managing your stress well, that's part of emotional intelligence. You could fall apart. So,
You will.
Or you use coping mechanisms that are completely unhealthy. And those are those defense mechanisms that we spoke about. So you have to make an active, conscious effort to consider the various elements of emotional intelligence, because it covers things like authentic leadership. Had another question the other day about another leadership style. So it's such a broad range of skills that are so essential to live a balanced life, really.
Great. From Kush, how does this relate with design thinking, which also touches user emotions throughout the process?
So design thinking is very much like a process that you need to think about. And it's the same instance in emotional intelligence. If you are going into a situation that is problematic, what is your thinking? Now, there's an amazing book by Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. So in my particular course, I talk about this thinking about thinking, and that is a lot about using, I would say, design thinking. How do you design your thinking in the way that you go about solving problems, managing conflict, whatever the case might be? So I think, yes, there's definitely, what would you call it, a resemblance, a symbol of it. So, yeah.
Great. Douglas has asked, I think maybe this one's been answered in part already, but what specific suggestions or examples can we give to control our individual egos?
Ask yourself, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? Then I want you to think about from a different perspective and think about, well, what is it that they might be feeling or thinking, particularly in the field of a conflict environment. But when you are feeling that emotion, you actually have to stop yourself. And sometimes stopping yourself is really difficult because the urge is so strong emotionally. But you have to, by stopping yourself, you're actually engaging with your frontal, your conscious thinking, because subconsciously it's all happening. And it happens, and I'm telling you, in 1/8 of a second, our emotional response. That is so quick. And if you don't stop it, what happens is it's called the amygdala hijack. So you end up losing your marbles for a short while. But the whole point is to engage with your thought processes. Stop and ask yourself, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? And start processing that. And that is where that whole design thinking comes up, and asking yourself questions. Immediately, you can start to rationalize with your thinking, and that's where the emotion starts to just sort of phase out a little bit.
Perfect, thank you. Second last question that's been upvoted the most, I wasn't ignoring you, Trey. Do silos and lack of EQ lend themselves to logical thinking fallacies?
Hans, do you want to answer that one?
No.
Okay, so do silos and
lack of EQ lend themselves to logical thinking fallacies?
Absolutely. Remember, when research will show this, and even in some of the studies I've done, that even though you might have high IQ, it's really beneficial when it comes to problem solving and logic reasoning and so forth. But EQ supersedes IQ by far, actually. To have EQ and IQ is really, really good. But if you don't have EQ, yes, IQ just becomes not the best. So I hope that answers the question.
Hans, did you want to add anything else?
No. You cannot beat Kirsten with those explanations. It's just perfect. It was a question for Kirsten in any case.
I thought so too. Sorry, this one's just come through. Shimano. Empathy seems to be increasingly a middle and lower management concern. How do we really meaningfully and successfully implement it upwards, especially in organizations where EQ is not a topic of subject or concern?
I can elaborate on that.
Yeah, go for it.
There's nothing to implement like a system or a training or qualification course of that. That is done by individuals. I can tell you that. The way, if you are ready to change, if you are ready to contribute to a change, to a better work environment, you must start with changing yourself, understanding. As of, just like Kirsten said earlier, when somebody approaches you disrespectful and it creates an emotion, everything that creates an emotion, you need to understand in that self-awareness as to what exactly is it? Why does that trigger that emotion in me? What is it? It has something to do with you. It triggers something in you. So instead of looking at the bad side on the other side, he was bad to me and throwing toys out of the cot. Why is it that it triggers such an emotion in you? This is what you need to find out. So that being said, if you're cool and good on the lower levels, which we often see, so I can relate to that, there's a good camaraderie and that's actually holding the whole thing together. But if you want to upstream that, do it in a collective, do it together. But bottom line, you, as an individual, you can already contribute by applying it, and you will see the change. They cannot run away from it because of that energetical connection that you have. If you constantly apply emotional intelligence, they cannot run away with it. They cannot fight it. So you are, and don't be scared, as an individual, already part of the solution and no more longer a part of the problem. But don't think in spheres like we have to roll out a massive training program and we need to bring him to leadership courses and stuff like that. These guys up there know the whole 9 yards in theory. They have every book in their shelves. The problem is the application. And as I said, knowledge is power, but as long as you don't apply it, it doesn't help you. So it just needs to be applied. And the biggest obstacle you will see when you start applying that is to suck up your personal ego. That's the winning recipe. And then you need no more trainings because they have heard it all, they have read it all, they have seen it all. Application is the time now. And everybody can contribute, every single individual. Make the difference. Go and run with it. Try it out and prove this tactic wrong. Prove it wrong. Try it. I had a big meeting with also a big company. And I said, how do you do this? And how do you engage data? I said, why don't you every day in the morning when you get up and you go in the factory, top manager, and you select one person and put a smile in his face, because it won't take much. He looked at me, what is he talking about now? I said, you will see the difference. And I said, I came to you with an airplane today, and I went to the security and said, do you know how much nonsense these people have to listen to all day? My watch down, my water bottle gone, I don't have time. So these guys at the airport security are listening to this nonsense of passengers the whole day. So I went through and I told this to manager to try. It's simple. You don't need a management decision for that. You don't need a CAPEX approval for that. You decide for yourself every second, every minute, every hour. And I walked up to this person and said, sir, thank you very much for making our flight safe. I really mean it. I felt immediately how he felt. I felt how I felt. He was walking to his colleagues and said, you know what this man said? He said, thank you. And you can see through this energetic connections that we are all in, that you make him happy, you make yourself happy, and it's going its way. It's just as simple as that. It just needs to be applied. Start with this every second, every minute, every hour. It's your choice. No CAPEX approval, no management approval needed. You make the call. Run.
Absolutely. Got a practical question for you here from Matthew. How would you rate the importance of sleep management for emotional self-regulation?
Oh, 10
Kirsten, I'm going
out of
to throw this one over to you, Far.
10 out of 10. You know, the problem with lack of sleep is when we are not sleeping enough, our bodies produce adrenaline and cortisol to keep us going. And over time, overproduction of this can cause all sorts of problems and issues when it comes to regulating the self. And when I talk about regulating the self, I'm talking about emotions. So, I mean, if I don't have good sleep over a couple of nights, I become super ratty, really irritable, short-fused, and I immediately know, like, I haven't had enough sleep. So while guys are super proud of saying, oh, well, I've only had 4 hours sleep and I must carry on with my job, the reality is you're not able to do your job effectively because your brain hasn't had that opportunity to self-regulate. It is absolutely essential. We did, I've studied sleep many years ago, and we did experiments on rats, and over time we stopped the rats from falling asleep, and over time the rats died. So if that can just put it in a nutshell of how important sleep is, I hope that certainly sends a very clear message that when people do say, oh, sleep is so important, yes, absolutely it is. Because if you don't get that sufficient sleep, you're not able to self-regulate in a way that is effective and efficient. So as simple as that.
Perfect. Couldn't agree more. I know my retinus levels even after one night bad sleep. Okay, thank you to everybody who stuck it around this long. We know we've gone quite over time. I have one last question directed at you, Hans, from an anonymous attendee. In what context can a lioness be a lion?
I'm not quite sure if I understand the question. In what context can a lioness be a lion?
Yeah.
I can only imagine.
I would imagine, Hans, this would be in an environment maybe where the role of a female has to take on quite a big position and be quite assertive maybe, or quite direct, and maybe the perception of that is considered, you know, not good because they're becoming sort of a lion, so to speak.
A lioness becomes a lion. I don't know. I have to give this a pass. Kirsten, maybe you want to elaborate on that. I'm not sure what this is revolving around.
Yeah, you know, I think that's maybe that question's relating to a sense of identity. You know, the typical role that you might need to take on. When is it okay to become a lion? You know, as I say, when we went back to that transactional analysis, we need to think of the context that we are operating in. If you are working in an environment where you have to be in a situation where you cannot deviate from the rule, and if someone deviates from the rule, there's a severe consequence to it. So your style of leadership may need to be quite authoritative. It might need to be quite directive, which, yes, that's great. But it's how you go about doing it. How am I communicating it? Am I yelling and saying, make sure, da, 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 you know, am I being quite forceful in a way that instills fear? Or am I doing it in a way that, yes, I'm getting the key message across that something needs to be done, but I'm doing it in a way that it is assertive, but is also respectful. And it's not in where I'm expressing my emotion like by yelling and being aggressive about it. So we just need to realize we can still take on the role of having to be in an environment where, you know, we need to ensure there's order, but it's how we go about doing it that is key. That's how I sort of maybe understand the question a little bit. Like, yes, you can be a lion, but you've got to realize the context in how you are displaying yourself and what exactly is your intention behind it. Are you there to victimize and blame and belittle people because you feel insecure? What is the situation? You've got to analyze the context. That's how I understand it.
Good.
Perhaps anonymous posters welcome to mail me as well and clarify if we misunderstood that one. So that is it. Thank you very much. We ran way over time. I think we could carry on this topic quite a lot longer. That is it for today. As I've mentioned, I will share the recordings. I will email them out. Do follow us on LinkedIn, etc., to keep updated. We do run these webinars. We try to run them at least every second month. And if there's anything, contact me on marketing@incona.org, and I'll certainly direct you to the appropriate people. But thank you everyone for joining for so long. Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you, Hans.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. I've loved it.
As always, thank you very much. Thanks, Kirsten. Thanks, Taryn.
Okay. Have a good one, everyone.
Likewise.
Bye.